So delighted that Aviation is here in Cape Town. Can you just give us a little bit of background to the latest developments at Cape Town International Airport?
Well, we're very proud that Aviation is hosted for the first time within South Africa in Cape Town. And apart from what I said earlier on, Cape Town really is one of our flagship airports. We have a stable of 9 airports, and Cape Town being the best airport in Africa just was fitting. But in terms of the amazing partnership, the collaboration that we've seen between ourselves and ACSA has really resulted in a growth of over 20% in international passengers coming into Cape Town, which is phenomenal growth. And so for that, it speaks to what we need to do as an airport infrastructure to ensure that our infrastructure is in line with such huge growth. And there obviously is a lot more growth potential, but in terms of what we need to do from an airport perspective, we're looking at a realigned runway. We're looking at redoing our domestic terminal, our international terminal, some of the remote parking apron stands. So there's about 5-6 key infrastructure initiatives, projects that are being planned for Cape Town. And the Cape Town Airport is taking the chunk of our CapEx funding to show you the development that we see within Cape.
And looking ahead, do you only see this collaborative approach, bearing more fruit for the city and for the economy here in the Western Cape?
Oh, most definitely. I think there's still so much potential for this opportunity, for this growth that still needs to be realized. I mean, not only do we speak about the international, the growth in international passengers, but we can start to look at cargo. The cargo numbers must also be increased. So I think as we progress in the one aspect, we'll start to develop. Now, the conversation will start to move around to cargo to make sure that the value proposition is a holistic one. But notwithstanding that, because I said we are a network of 9 airports, there's also similar initiatives that are happening within OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg and Gauteng, and similarly King Shaka around Dube Trade Port and the collaboration there. So what's happened is that the partnership within Western Cape has really ensured that the acceleration of the partnerships within Gauteng and King Shaka, being KwaZulu-Natal, have equally started to receive benefits coming out of there.
And obviously in Durban we have seen the return of the British Airways service, which is a massive development forward. How does that make you feel within the airport group to actually get these routes that you've been looking to get for quite a few years?
Yeah. It says that we are clearly now focusing on the right things. As part of our Vision 2025, one of the pillars we've got is to grow our footprint. And I said earlier on that not only is our responsibility in South Africa, but it's to Africa as a whole. So being the airport's infrastructure player that we are within South Africa naturally means that we have to be equally responsible for other airports within Africa. So what we then want to leverage is to make sure that we package this value proposition for the rest of the African airports that would want to see exponential growth in a minimal amount of time. We have the track record.
And can you advise us on some of those contracts that you have, or some areas that you're looking to move into?
So at the moment, we've signed a very successful MoU with Ghana Airports Company Limited, where we are helping them commission their new international terminal in Accra. We've equally signed an MoU with the Cameroon Civil Aviation Authority, specifically around helping them develop Yaoundé, around the master planning, around some of the things that they want to do. We've recently signed an MoU with Namibia. We've signed actually not an MoU, but we've been given a contract for the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport in Lusaka in terms of commissioning that airport, so that's also very good. We've signed an MoU with Liberia. There's a number of conversations that are happening, and there's a number of traction that is already starting for us that we're starting to gain. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of countries that we haven't even started conversations with.
And it's good to see that you're taking this stance, a sort of a parental stance in some ways, for the continent to use your expertise to help it grow. What's been the reaction from a lot of other African countries? Because a lot of them are very proud, and sometimes reaching out to somebody else is a big step.
Yes, and because we've got the proven track record, it's always, I guess, the proof is in what we've done, and so that other African airports have now started to see We obviously also play a very strong role in Airports Council International, both in Africa and world. The CEO of Airports Company is the president of ACSA World. So even on the international platform, we have a voice, we are heard, and truly respected in terms of our track record. And so it becomes a little bit easier. However, we do find that in terms of Africa, around the culture, around some of the dependencies, there's still a dependency. We find that, you know, they could find European advisory services, and we're saying, folks, we're here. We are a flight away, we're closer, and it actually does come out cheaper if you use an African-based airports operator. And those are some of the conversations that are difficult, but we're starting to see some streamlining happening and headway being made.
And at the recent IATA AGM in Sydney last week, I was speaking to a few people, and they always seem very quick to blame airports for the problems. They talk about airport infrastructure being the biggest problem facing airline growth. Now, what's your viewpoint on that from the airport perspective?
And for me, it's a symbiotic relationship that where the more airlines come through, the more the infrastructure has got to just be maintained and be at the same level. So, and I mentioned it earlier, you can't have routes development happening outside of infrastructure development. The two are very much a collaboration, and I agree that there has to be far greater context around the collaboration, ensuring that both parties serve each other, because we cannot exist without the passengers coming through our airports, and rightfully so. The passengers cannot come through in their numbers without the right infrastructure to support.
And what's been the main obstacle that you're facing currently in Africa to be able to fulfil the potential that is there?
So I think, apart from the normal funding perspective, that because that's also its own nuance. I mean, airport infrastructure investment is not cheap by any means. So we find that in a lot of the conversations where there's either a deadlock or an unnecessary delay, it's around particularly the funding. So that being aside, there's huge infrastructure opportunities within Africa, and not only from an airport perspective, but from a road, rail, ports. So the biggest challenge, I think, is to make sure that there's an underlying strategy that speaks to each country's overall infrastructure plan and infrastructure spent. Likewise, you cannot just bring in investment on airports and not necessarily look at roads and not look at ports where there are. So for me, the biggest thing is to ensure that that value proposition that a country offers around its transport nodes is very much integrated, and that's still going to take time.
And what's your initial views of the Aviation programme this morning, and what do you hope to achieve from being here?
So my initial views, being the very first one, I mean, this is the third year running, so this is my first one being in attendance. I think that in terms of the audience, it's a very wide audience. So you've got airlines, you've got obviously people that are speaking routes, you've got airports, people that are obviously speaking infrastructure, and you've got in the case of air access, when I mentioned earlier on around the markets and the opportunities. So I think it's a very, very good balance in terms of the mixture of people, and I think they also mentioned hoteliers. So I think that perspective is very good in terms of the balance. I do, however, put the challenge out to everybody collectively, because our responsibility is to go further than just the discussions at Aviation. It's to literally now implement in collaboration the next steps and to go out into Africa and make sure that we go out and hunt as a pack. That is very key.
And if I gave you a magic wand and could give you one wish to come true for the African aviation market, what would that be?
Connectivity, connectivity, connectivity. That is simple, that is efficient, that is cost effective, because that speaks to obviously the routes, it speaks to obviously the airport's infrastructure that have got to match the routes, and it speaks to serving the market. There's a huge, huge market potential for Africa for us to move around. I mentioned the example of recently I had to go to Yaoundé, and it felt like I was going to the moon. It's easier for me to fly from Johannesburg to Canada than it is for me to fly from Johannesburg to Cameroon. And for me, that just boggles the mind. So for me, there must be concerted effort into strengthening intra and inter-African movement, and thereby just really unlocking the economic potential that we have.
And just one last question, is that a big debate in IATA and generally now is about women in aviation, and there's not enough senior female players in the industry. Now, Africa is actually a little bit ahead of the game with other continents. There's more, but you know, what's your view on that? Obviously, as a leading female within the aviation sector.
The aviation sector is very guilty of that. Internationally, regionally, into Africa, there are just not enough females within the sector. And before I got into ACSA, I was actually flying. I fly light aircraft, and you could see it from there. That is very much a male-dominated industry. And I said that the beauty of it is because we make it seem to be infrastructure or airplanes, that women may think that it's a lot more difficult to get in than it actually is. So apart from the industry needing to open up, I do think that there's equally a big role for female leaders that are already within the industry to start going out there to make it very possible and tangible for other females to come into the industry, because we have done it, and it is our responsibility as the female leaders that are already in here to make sure that we get the word out and we get the numbers in.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to